day this week, we've got a new instructor going live to stream as we knit, sew, crochet, decorate, and bake our way through the week. So you will get provided step-by-step demonstrations of incredibly cute projects that are perfect for gifting to your loved ones this Valentine's Day. We want you to make sure to download those free patterns and recipes by clicking the link in the description. So if you have any questions at all during the event, please feel free to leave your comments in the blue chat box below, or if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, you can use the chat there as well. I'll be keeping an eye on those comments during the event. And if this is the first time that you're joining us for one of these tutorials, if you have a question about what we're working on in the moment, I do try to slide those in whenever there is an opportunity, but always feel free to drop more general questions in. We usually, not always, but usually have time at the end to get some of those more general questions asked. Now you can see her nodding. This is going to be the person sharing her expertise with us all today. This is Jen Lucas. So while everybody is taking a look at the chat box and saying hi, I'm going to let you introduce yourself, Jen. Let us know a little bit about you and a brief intro into what project we're making together today.
Great. Thanks, Leah. I'm so happy to be here. I love when we do these weeks of crafting here on Craftsy. It's like so much fun to see all the different projects that everybody makes. So like Leah said, I'm Jen Lucas. I'm a knit and crochet designer. I'm managing editor of our sister site, The Knitting Circle, and I also am a Craftsy contributor, obviously, because you're watching me here on Craftsy today. And I have been designing for over 15 years now, and I really love it. And I'm so excited today about this little project that I have designed for you. It's something that I've wanted to knit for a long time, and I finally did it. And so it's this little cupcake. So it's just like a toy or an amigurumi. And I'm going to show you all the steps to make it. It's probably a little bit more of an intermediate type project, but if you're a beginner, don't let that scare you away. I'm going to show you everything you need to know on how to make it. And when it's done, you will have this adorable little cupcake that you didn't even have to bake.
Well, Jen, we already have quite a few hellos dropping in. I think the furthest I've seen so far is from Juneau, Alaska. So welcome, welcome. Everybody that's out there, even if you don't have a question, we love to see where you're viewing from. And if you're working on the project with us, let us know. Or if you're going to be planning on doing this later, you can let us know as well. I am, Jen, going to drop you. I know I'm going to set you off onto your demonstration right away, but our first question is actually about the things that you would use. And we've got a viewer out there that's wondering about needle sizes. So Dawn says, the smallest needles that I have are a size 3, and I only have 4 of them. So is this something that would work for today's project?
Yes, absolutely. So in the pattern, and I'll talk about this a little more in a minute when we get started with the actual project, the pattern itself calls for US size 2 needles. And I know not a lot of people have those. I happen to have them because I like to knit a lot of socks. The main thing with this is that the gauge is not important. So your size 3 needles probably are going to be perfectly fine. The only thing you have to keep in mind is that your fabric needs to be tight enough that when we're filling the project with fiber fill at the end, you don't want that stuffing to be poking through. So I would recommend, I mean, I know that this is the kind of project that nobody's going to really make a gauge swatch on, but I would say if you are going to go up a needle size, just knit yourself back and forth, just even a little square of stockinette where you're knitting on the right side and purling on the wrong side. And yes, you're working back and forth in rows rather than in the round where your gauge might be different, but just, it will give you a rough idea if you're going to make an okay fabric. Because the last thing you want to do is knit the whole project and the whole thing's kind of loose and you go to put that filling inside, the stuffing inside, and it's just poking out the side. So yes, you can really use any size needle you want. The other thing too is the pattern calls for sport weight yarn. And you could always grab, like a worsted weight yarn and try, or a DK and try it on the 3, or, even take a larger yarn and just go down, a few needle sizes from what the ball band recommends. And, I can't give you the exact yardages you would need in that case, but your cupcake would come out a different size, but there are tons of ways that you can get around not having the right size needle.
All right, perfect. Well, that's the one I wanted to get to you right away. We do have a couple more hellos coming in. And again, any more general questions, I'm going to hold those to the end because Jen's got a great demonstration coming up. And this is where I back up, Jen, hand it over to you. We're going to get started.
Okay, great. So I've showed you my little cupcake here. Like I said, it's made with a sport weight yarn. And so we're going to actually be starting here at the bottom center and working our way out. Then we're going to make the side of the cupcake. This is like the cupcake wrapper, I guess you would say. I've added this little horizontal braid here. And then I switched colors. That's like the cake, the cupcake actual part. And then we changed to our last color to do the frosting. So you can pick any color combination you like here. For example, I don't know why I strongly dislike chocolate cake. So I made mine a vanilla cupcake, but you can make your cupcake whatever flavor you want with whatever color yarn you want. So like I said, you're going to need some sport weight yarn. So I just really grabbed stuff I already had at home. Our color A is this dark one here. You're going to need 48 yards of yarn for that. Our color B, which is the actual like physical cake, is just 6 yards because we're only going to end up working 4 rounds in this color. And then 38 yards of our color C. So those are the yardages for if you are using if you're using the needle size that I said, or not even using the needle size that I said, which is US size 2, but you're getting the gauge that I listed in the pattern, that's the yardages for the yarn. But, these particular balls, they come in pretty large amounts. This one's 340 yards. So, this is a really great project for leftovers because at the most we're only using 48 yards. So that's really great. And then for our needles, these, I couldn't find my US size 2s. I must have put them in a different project after I finished my cupcake, but you're going to need some double pointed needles. I just grabbed these US size 1s, and I'm going to demonstrate on larger needles too, so it's a little bit easier to see. But the pattern calls for double pointed needles. Just remember, whatever method you like for doing small circumference knitting in the round will work here. So if you like to use double pointed needles, you can use those. You can use the magic loop method. You can use a 2 circular or 2 circs method. So you have some options here. I've listed the double points, but no, whatever method you like for small circumference knitting is going to work here. The only thing that is not going to work probably is one of those really tiny little like 8 or 9 inch circulars that you typically use for socks, because we're starting at that bottom center point here. You're going to have a very tight number of stitches here at the beginning. So I just wouldn't use like an 8 or 9 inch circular. Maybe once you get all this increasing done, you could use that if you wanted to. In addition to that, we just need a few other things. So of course you're going to need some scissors. I just have these little snips. We're going to need some kind of tapestry needle for weaving in our ends at the end. A locking stitch marker. I always just have like a bunch of different ones. So these, I just buy plastic ones. I like the ones that are like safety pins. But you'll need some locking stitch markers. You need an optional little, this is very tiny, there we go, an optional little button to put on the top. I did a link to the exact buttons I used in the pattern. They came in a pretty big pack though, but just know it's, an approximately 1 inch wide button. This would be a great thing to grab your button stash if you have one. I mean, I don't even really sew, and even I have a little bit of a button stash. So, but the heart ones are linked if you do want them. And then you'll need some polyfill stuffing. So this you just buy at the craft store, for stuffing toys. And then let's see if there's anything else. I think that's it. So now that we've done that, we can go ahead and get started on our cupcake. And again, we're going to start down here, and I'm going to start with something that is called the circular cast on. And this is something that you might not see a lot in knitting. And I first learned this several years ago in an in-person class with a Craftsy instructor, Myra Wood. And I was learning about how to knit pie shawls, which was developed by Elizabeth Zimmerman. And she showed this cast on in that class, and it is a great cast on to know because it allows you to have a very tight center. So if you're familiar with crochet, and you know the magic ring or magic loop technique in crochet, this is very similar to that, but for knitting. And so what it allows us to do is once we've cast on the stitches, we can pull on the tail and it will completely tighten the bottom center here. I am going to demonstrate this for you. And if you still don't get it, that's totally okay. It took me a while to wrap my head around it as well. Just know that we're going to end our circular cast on with 7 stitches. So if this part is not for you, do not let it discourage you. Just cast on 7 stitches and you can use your tail to seam up your hole at the end. We're not going to let any particular part of this stop us from our crafting. And also you can keep in mind that you will be able to re-watch this live event later. So if you need a refresher on this cast on or any part of what I'm doing, you can always watch it later. And like I mentioned at the beginning, I'm the managing editor of the knittingcircle.com website. We do have a video over there on how to do the circular cast on. It's a standalone video. So we have lots of ways for you to learn how to do this, but let's take a look at it now. So I'm going to use, again, thicker yarn and larger needles just so everything's easier to see. And I'm going to just start with the yarn laying over my hand. I'm leaving a tail about 6 to 8 inches. I never really measure this, enough so that you can weave in your tail at the end. And I tend to do this because I do it this way in crochet over 2 fingers, just make an X like this. So my yarn tail's closest to me, and then my working yarn going to my ball of yarn is crossing over the top. I'm going to grab one of my needles. And again, if you do crochet, you could think about this as the crochet hook. And if you don't crochet, that's okay. We're going to go under this first loop here. And then I'm just going to grab that strand and twist to pull it up just like that. And that's 1 stitch on the needle. So let's just look at that whole thing just really quick again. Again, yarn over the hand, bring it around. Again, I like the 2 fingers like this. So we've got tail, working yarn. We're going to go under the strand on the right, over the strand on the left, and catch it to pull it through that loop and bring it onto the needle. So we have 1 stitch. So at this point, I'm just pinching it just like this to hold everything together. And now I have my working yarn over here in my left hand, and we have this loop that we're going to work into. So again, very much like the magic ring or magic loop in crochet. So now we're kind of going to do this over under pattern. So we have 1 stitch on there. We're going to go, and we went under, like technically we went under. So now we're going to go over. So we're going to just bring our needle around and just grab that yarn. So we're just grabbing the yarn like that. That will be our 2nd stitch. Now we're going to go into the loop again, between the loop and the strand, and then pick up the strand and bring it back through the loop for our 3rd stitch. Get a strand on the needle for the 4th stitch, 5th stitch, under and between, over and under, and there we go. And then we have our 7 stitches. Again, I'm just really quick going to do that just one more time because I know that this is one of those things that, for some people, it might take a few tries. So again, under, over, bring the loop through. So that's 1 stitch. Now we're going to go over and under, or like, oh, and by over and under, I mean we're going over and then under. It's like under the loop, okay? So that's what I mean by that. So that's how I remember it. So that one was, we went in the loop. Now we're above the loop. We're going into the loop between the 2 strands. Go back through the loop. That's 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And this, as far as I know, you really do need to use an odd number of stitches because you want your first and last stitch to go into the loop in order to lock them into place. So we have our 7 stitches, and you can see now if we pull our tail, that hole's starting to close. But I never fully close it just yet because otherwise it makes the stitches really tight. So I always just leave that a little bit open, and then in a few rounds, I will go ahead and tighten it fully. So we have done our 7 stitches. So now we can place them on our double pointed needles, and I'm just sliding the stitches purlwise to get them sort of oriented just exactly how I want. So at the beginning, I did 2, 2, and 3, and I'm going to knit with a 4th. I will say this might be a little bit easier to do if you do know how to do magic loop, because I feel like at the beginning with double pointed needles, it's always a little bit fiddly. Okay, so we're just going to find where our working yarn is, and it's over here. So we're just going to get everything untwisted here and situated, so then we're ready to start knitting. There we go. Again, don't let this discourage you. It's just double pointed needles are just a tad bit fiddly at the beginning. So, okay, we're going to start working in the round. We can place a marker. And now we'll start working the cupcake base, and I'll just work a couple rounds here. And so to start out, we're going to do knit into the front and back 3 times. So I've inserted my stitch. We're going to knit into the front of that stitch, so basically knitting it like we normally would. Leave the stitch on the left needle, come around to the back of that stitch and knit it through the back again. So we're doing an increase. So we're doing knit front and back 3 times. That's 1. That's 2. And then I have my free needle in my left hand, so now we'll just come around over here and keep on going. So we did 2 knit front and backs. So now let's do the third. Third, 1, and then knit 1. Okay, and then we're coming to our last needle where we are going to do knit front and back twice and then knit 1. So we're going from 7 stitches to 12. So really, if I was doing this where I was just casting on stitches and was going to sew the hole up at the end, I might, cast on 6 stitches so then I could just double them all. But again, because that circular cast on really does need an odd number of stitches, I started with 7, and then that's why you have mostly knit front and backs, but then some knit ones in the middle. So that takes care of round 1. Round 2 and the even rounds for the cupcake base are going to be just knitting all the stitches. So I'm just going to knit around all of these stitches. Again, just knitting each one as I come to it. And then just turning. When I've run out of stitches on one needle, I just move the needle to my right hand and keep on going. There we go. And knitting all the stitches. So let's do one more increase row just so we can make sure we really understand what's going on here. And you can already see it's getting a little bit easier as now the double pointed needles are able to get further away from each other, and it just makes it a little bit easier and less cumbersome as the rounds go on. And again, I personally like to knit on double pointed needles where I form them into a triangle like this and then use my 4th one to knit. And this really just developed from me knitting socks. And when I'm knitting socks using double pointed needles, I put half the stitches on one needle, and then needle 2 has a quarter of the stitches and needle 3 has a quarter of the stitches. And so I have just carried that over into almost all of my double pointed needle knitting, that I like this configuration the best. You can also split it over 4 needles. So then you would have something that looks like this, kind of like a tic-tac-toe sign, but it's making a square. And then you would use a 5th needle to knit. But that just, to me, it just is a little bit more fiddly because you've got one more needle in the mix. But that is very much a personal preference thing. So now let's work round 3. We're going to knit into the front and back, knit 1 all the way around. So knit front and back, knit 1. We're just going to keep repeating that. And so we are adding 6 stitches to this round. So we're going now from 12 stitches to 18. Okay, knit 1, knit front and back, knit 1, knit front and back, knit 1, and we're done. And then let's really quick here, just take our tail at this point, now that we're getting a little bit away, and if we just pull on that tail, you can see here that it tightened up that hole completely. So then you have a nice neat hole. You don't have to sew anything at the end, which is also really nice for projects like this, like toys that are flat on the bottom, because it's not going to be so bulky on the bottom there, because you're not going to have to be sewing anything closed, which can sometimes add a little bit of bulk. So here, all you would just need to do then is weave in that end, and you could just sort of weave it in away from that center. So I'm just going to continue working the pattern a couple more rounds. And while I'm doing that, Leah, do we have any questions or anything that anybody's wondering about?
Well, we have a couple things here. One, I wanted to share from a user named AK Skater. Wants to make a dozen of these for later to hand out at the retirement home, but I like the idea that we're going to make a dozen cupcakes, but we're just going to have them be knitted.
Right. It's so funny because I'm saying like, oh, you know, knit your cupcake, don't bake it. But it's kind of funny because it's obviously going to take you longer to knit a cupcake than it is to bake one, especially if you're like me and you're baking your cupcake straight out of that box from the grocery store.
Oh my goodness, of course.
Yeah, I love that idea of knitting a dozen of them. I think that would be so, so cute. So cute.
This other question, it's a little more general one, but you kind of touched base on this topic already once. So I'm going to slide it in now. It's from Brenda. So Brenda's been crocheting for over 50 years, but really wants to learn how to knit and is curious how hard it is to make that switch. She says she's pretty much an expert on crochet, but a complete newbie with knitting. So if you want to talk a little bit about that, I think that'd be helpful.
Yeah, of course. So, you know, a lot of people do end up making not the switch, but add to their needle art repertoire, you know, knitting or crochet. For example, I knit for years before I ever started crocheting. And so you absolutely can do it. The thing that you just have to accept is that what I have really, really found is that whatever one you did first, for most people, you are always going to find that one to be easier. I have asked so many people about this, you know, and talking even with you, the viewers, when we're doing these lives, it just always seems like whatever you start with first and you learn with first is, for most people, going to just feel easier to you. So when you start with the knitting, don't let it discourage you if you are feeling like it's a little bit tricky, because the rules are a little bit different. You know, especially if, like you said, if you've been crocheting for 50 years, you are a crochet expert. I would suggest if you crochet sort of the traditional way and you're not crocheting truly left-handed, as in mirror image, you know, I think when you're learning to knit, you probably will find the continental knitting style easier because you're holding your yarn in your left hand. I learned to knit using the English or throwing method. So I keep the yarn in my right hand when I'm knitting, but that was really when I learned to crochet and then I had to have the yarn in my left hand. That was a difficult switch for me to make. And so I still knit with the yarn in my right hand, but crochet with the yarn in my left. I would say for you, check out continental knitting. I think you'll find it easier. And then also on our Knitting Circle website, we do have a 14-day free Learn to Knit series. So even if you're already starting to learn the basics, you can check out that site. And, you know, I demonstrate how to do a lot of the basic knitting things in both styles of continental versus English, right hand versus left hand holding the yarn. And that will definitely help you. And there's a free pattern that comes along with that one too. So yes, but please, absolutely, let's do all the crafts, shall we? Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Is that it for questions for now, Leah?
That is, I'll just remind everybody, if you weren't with us at the top of the hour, we have a chat box. That's where I'm getting those questions from. So it's either below your video viewer on the website, or you can just shoot your comments into the chat on Facebook or YouTube. Anything that Jen is doing, you have a question about, you can drop those questions in. I'll try to slide those in as we go. And then anything else we'll save towards the end of today's project. So that's it for now, Jen. I'm going to send it back to you.
Okay, great. All right, so I'm just finishing off this row, but then I got talking, so I'm not quite sure if my stitch count is right. But we're going to just end this. I'm going to do one more knit round, but you will just follow the pattern as it's written in your directions. I am doing less rounds here, just so we can get through all the little parts of this. But just keep in mind, you will follow the pattern, but basically for this cupcake base, all we're doing is working those knit front and backs in between some knit stitches, and then we're breaking that up with rounds of just plain old knitting. So let's see, this one we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, so I'm trying to get, for this little swatch, I'm just trying to get to 24. But again, you'll get to, I believe the pattern, the total number is 48. So you will have additional rows that are listed in the pattern. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. You can see here, I'm kind of just redistributing the stitches a bit, because for this project now, I would just try to have, if I'm doing double points, I would go with having an even number on each one, versus, like I said, when I do socks, I do half the stitches on one and then a quarter and a quarter. This one, I really am just going to do split them up 3 ways, so do a third on each. That's 4. Okay, there we do have 24. Okay, so after you've worked the base, you're then going to continue with the same color and start working the wrapper. And let's bring in our cupcake. So the wrapper here, it's kind of this ribbing pattern, but it's actually got some slip stitches in it. A lot of the cupcake patterns I saw online, which they were all so cute, just use regular old like 2x2, like knit 2, purl 2 ribbing. But I felt like it needed, at least with this yarn, this gauge, I felt like I wanted a little more structure to the wrapper. So I used this stitch pattern that uses slip stitches, I think, in an interesting way, to make that cupcake wrapper. So let's look at how to do that. So our round 1 is purl 1, slip 1 with yarn in back, purl 2, and you were going to just do that all the way around. So purl 1, so our yarn was in the front for the purl, bring the yarn to the back, slip 1 purlwise with yarn in back, bring the yarn to the front, purl 2. And you're just going to repeat that for the entire round. Purl 1, yarn to the back, slip 1 purlwise with yarn in back, bring the yarn back to the front to purl 2. So that takes care of round 1. Just got one more side to do here, I think, or maybe not. I don't know, but I'm just going to keep working till I'm the end of the round, and then I'm going to move my little stitch marker so it's more clear. Here we're going to slip, purl 2. So really here, you really just need to know, for the most part, knits, purls, the slipping the stitches is pretty easy. We do have to do some decreases at the end to make the top of our cupcake. I mean, so again, this is a little bit of an intermediate pattern, but I've also heard of people, knitting whole sweaters as their first project. So, if this seems hard, just take it step by step, rewatch the video if you need to. Even if you're a beginner, it doesn't mean you can't do this. It just means you're going to be learning a lot of new skills along the way. Okay, so that takes care of round 1. I just need to finish that last stitch here. And now we're ready to do round 2. And before that, I'm just going to move up my stitch marker here, so it's a little bit more obvious where my start of round is. For round 2, we're going to do knit 3, slip 1 with yarn in front, and we're going to do that all the way around. So knit 3, 1, 2, 3, and then slip one purlwise with yarn in front. So we bring the yarn between the needles to the front, slip the stitch, then bring the yarn to the back again, because now we need to knit 3. 1, 2, 3, and then slip one with yarn in front. You're going to keep repeating that all the way around. Now, you might notice that we're ending this needle with that slip one with yarn in front. So when I'm doing this, I slipped it with the yarn in front, and then I move it to the back again, so that when I pick up the yarn to start knitting this, I did do that last stitch correctly. That's one of those things where I feel like I often, if I'm going to make a mistake on a project like this, it would be there where I've just slipped this stitch, and then here, let's just leave the yarn hanging. So I slip the stitch with the yarn in front, I leave it hanging. Then I come over here and I need to knit. Well, this yarn was in front. I don't want to accidentally bring it over the needle this way and then knit this stitch. I'm just going to do it really quick so you can see. Because when I do that, what I end up creating is an extra stitch. I essentially just did a yarn over rather than slipping that stitch with the yarn in the front. I did slip the stitch with the yarn in the front, but I didn't leave the yarn in the front. I just took it over and canceled everything out and added an extra stitch. And then you're going to be wondering why your cupcake's not working out. So again, I'm going to move that to the back and then start my next needle. Knit 3, slip, and knit 3, and slip. And so you would keep, that was not right. I only knit 2. Let's knit 3, shall we? Or I slipped where I should have knit. Okay, we're going to just fix that really quick. And knit and slip. And so you will repeat that for the specified number of times in the pattern. And then once your cupcake base is done, or your cupcake wrapper, excuse me, we're going to knit all our stitches on the next round. So you would keep repeating those 2 rows for the number of times it says in the pattern, and then you'll have one more round where we're just knitting all the stitches. And we're knitting all those stitches because we're setting up to do this horizontal braid here, which I think just made the top of the cupcake look a little bit neater, I guess, rather than just switching colors. It gives it a little bit of texture right there, and I think it just makes it a little bit more realistic. Okay, so we've just got 8 more stitches here to go. And then we'll be ready to start this braid. We're going to be continuing again in color A, which for me here is kind of this bluish gray, be whatever color you're using for your cupcake wrapper. Okay, this part might be maybe the trickiest part of the cupcake, but it's still not too bad. Okay, so we're going to start first by increasing by 1 stitch. So with the left needle, we're going to pick up the strand between the 2 stitches. So we have, and it's a little bit tricky here because you did have the slipping of the stitch. So you just want to find the actual stitch that you actually had knit and not that little yarn that's just floating. So I can see that this is this one. Okay, yeah, we'll pick up this one. Just going to pick up one of those strands, put it onto your left needle, and then we're going to knit into the back of it. And that's a make 1. Just like that. So we increased by 1 stitch. We're going to slip this stitch purlwise from the right needle to the left needle, just like that. And now we're going to start our braid. We're going to bring our right needle around the back behind the first stitch on the left needle to knit the second stitch on the left needle through the back loop. We're going to leave these 2 stitches on the needle, and then we're going to come around to the front and knit that first stitch like we normally would, and then drop the whole thing off. Just like that. And keep on going. We're going to slip to the left-hand needle, bring our right needle around behind the first stitch to knit the second stitch through the back loop. just like that. Leave everything on the left needle, go into the first stitch like you normally would, and then take those 2 stitches off. So you're doing slip around the back, knit the second stitch through the back loop, knit the first stitch normally, take those 2 stitches off the left needle. And you can see here we're forming this cute little braid. You can use this in all sorts of things. And this braid has a lot of different names, and there's a lot of different techniques, and you know, just a lot of different ways that you can do this braid, but this is the way I like to do it. Again, we're going to slip to the left needle, bring the right needle around to the back, knit the second stitch through the back loop, knit the first stitch normally, take those first and second stitches off, and we'll just work that all the way around. You can see we're forming that nice braid there. And that's making this braid right here. So you would work that all the way around to the end. I'm just going to knit because that is a pretty time-consuming part of this. It's a slow round, I guess you could say. So I'm just going to go ahead and knit the rest of these stitches. But just know you would keep completing that braid around to the beginning of the round. And you will have that adorable little detail right there on your cupcake. So once we get back to where our marker is, the pattern tells us to remove the marker. I have my stitch marker right in the fabric, so I'm not going to actually move it just yet. So what we're going to do is we're going to slip 1 stitch from the left needle to the right needle. And if you remember, that's actually the extra stitch that we had first cast on, or that we had made, that extra make one. So we're going to now slip that back to the right hand needle and then take the second stitch on the right needle and pass it over the first. So basically, well, not basically, we are binding off 1 stitch. So that's just to keep it nice and continuous for the actual braid, had I done the braid all the way around. So once that is done, you get your braid all done. You, at this point, you would cut this and join your color B. So let's just talk about joining the colors. You don't need to sit then and watch me knit 4 plain rounds. So I'm going to just cut my yarn, leaving about, a 6 to 8 inch tail. And then let's see, do I have, is it a vanilla cupcake day? I think it is. So now I will just join in my new yarn, which is kind of this cream color here. And then when I am joining a new color, there's lots of different ways you can do this, but a lot of times I just take the new yarn. I'm going to be knitting, so the yarn's in the back. So we're going to just set it here, and I just kind of pinch it with my fingers, just like that. And then I'll insert my needle and simply just pick up the new color. And I'm just pinching that tail down so it doesn't get too loose. And then I just knit a couple stitches like that, and then just keep on going. You could also, work the tail in as you go. You could bring the tail sort of over your new stitches, but I do like to weave in my ends at the end. So I usually just leave that old color hanging out and then start working with the new color. So then we've just switched, and you'll work 4 rounds in that color B. So again, if you're using the same size needles and yarn and everything that I am, that's only 6 yards of yarn you need for that part. So once you have that done, you're going to then switch to color C. Here I did red for Valentine's Day. My cupcake kind of, I guess I'm making a patriotic cupcake. You could make this for all the holidays, not just Valentine's Day. But once you switch to color C, what we're going to do is make a little picot ridge. And so once I've joined color C, I knit 2 rounds, and then I worked around right here with the eyelets where I did a yarn over, knit 2 together all the way around. And let me just show you on this other sample how to do that, just in case you're not familiar with the yarn over, knit 2 together. So basically we're creating a row of eyelets. So again, this would be, you'd be following the pattern, and you're on round 3 of the frosting, and it's telling you to do yarn over, knit 2 together. So let's pretend we're with our color C at the beginning of the round. We're going to yarn over, bring the yarn over. This is the needle we're knitting with, our right needle. And then we knit the next 2 stitches together on the left needle. So we go into them from left to right together like that, to yarn over, knit 2 together. So then yarn over again, we bring the yarn in between the needles and over to yarn over, and then the next 2 stitches from left to right, we knit them together. And so we're creating these little holes. And so once it's done, you have these little eyelet-y holes here. That's round 3, and then you're going to knit 2 more rounds. And then we're going to work round 6, which is the picot, what did I call it exactly? Let's see. Form picot ridge. So the little picot ridge is just this little detail right here on the edge. And so if you're familiar with other knitting projects, there's lots of ways you can do picots. And I love, if you follow along any of the other lives and free patterns that I've done for Craftsy in the Knitting Circle, I take a lot of opportunity to put this little detail on things because I really have become obsessed with it over the last year or so. So to do this round 6, we are going to, let's just get situated here. So this is the start of our round. We're going to, with our right hand needle, we are going to pick up we're going to pick up 5 rounds below, and this would be the purl bump in color C. So it's like, basically, it's not like, it is. It's basically these purl bumps here, like you go down 5 rounds, it's going to be the first ones of your color C. So here it's really obvious since my colors are very different. So you're just picking up these purl bumps, just going right below. And so we're going to, there's a few different ways that you can do this. You can take it with your right needle. Let's see, right needle and pick it up. And then stick that onto your left needle. And then you're going to knit those 2 stitches together. So you're not really, I mean, you are adding an extra stitch and then decreasing because you're doing a knit 2 together. But just keep in mind, you're like doing it immediately because you're adding that stitch and then knitting it together. And all that's doing is it's basically pinching those rounds together. And so you end up getting, this is sometimes also, I mean, we're making picots, but this technique also sometimes is called a tuck, because you're grabbing the fabric from so many rounds down, and then it's going to create this little tuck in your fabric. And so we would just do this all the way around. So I think that at this point, Leah, I'm just going to work on doing this picot round really quick. Do we have any questions, comments, concerns about our cupcake?
We have a few comments, no questions at the moment, but this is a great time. We have about 15 minutes, a little less, with Jen. So if you're hanging on to a question, you probably do want to drop it into the chat box pretty quickly here so we have time to get to it. But we've got a couple comments. Karen chimed in with a little encouragement for Brenda and anybody else who is starting out with knitting to be patient and forgiving with yourself. So Karen knitted her very first project using one of your patterns, Jen, and it had some mistakes, she said, but it looks great. So really great to get that perspective from somebody that's also new to knitting.
Yes, and that's really true, is that we all make mistakes. It doesn't matter if you've been knitting for 1 year or 50 years. Everybody makes mistakes. And, you know, Brenda probably knows this from crocheting too, that, you know, everybody's going to make mistakes sometimes. I mean, even when I first started knitting, I accidentally knit a 40-foot long scarf. That sounds like an exaggeration, and that could not possibly be true, but it is. So, I mean, you can do you can make a lot of wild mistakes when you're first learning a craft, and you know what? It's okay, because like my 40-foot scarf is just hilarious now that that even happened. So yeah, just stick with it.
It feels like a Lenny Kravitz type scarf.
Yes, I made a Lenny Kravitz scarf before Lenny Kravitz had his giant scarf. But yeah, it stretched all the way across my apartment because I was knitting it long ways and didn't really know anything about gauge. I was just learning to knit. I taught myself out of a book, and I was like, oh, I just need this many stitches. And then when I bound off, it more than stretched across the entire length of my apartment. So good old
We
times.
did have a question just pop in here about the project. So I'm going to slide that in next.
Okay.
This comes from Sue. So Sue asks, if your color from 5 rows below is close to color C, would it be helpful to put a lifeline in that initial row to make it easy to pick up?
That's something I have not tried, but I think it is something that could work. And I'll just quickly talk about a lifeline for folks who don't know what it is. A lifeline you typically use with lace projects, but all sorts of projects really. And after you finished a row, or in this case, round, you would take some waste yarn or even plain old dental floss and load it on to a tapestry needle and run it through the stitches so that it runs through all the stitches, and then basically if you have to rip out, your stitches won't rip out past that point. And so the question is then, could you put a lifeline in at that point to help you identify where you need to pick up? And the answer is, yeah, you could, just as long as you're not accidentally somehow picking up the lifeline. I would think you would just want to use that lifeline as a guide back here and be careful not to pick it up. And then, because then you could just take it right back out at the end.
All right. And do you have time for one more question?
Oh, sure.
Okay, great. This is Brenda again. So Brenda uses yarn under to do amigurumis. Is there a yarn under equivalent in knit?
A yarn under. I'm not exactly sure what that would mean in knitting. So I'm not sure the answer to that one. I'm going to have to look that one up. You do sometimes see like yarn. Sometimes you'll see, instead of a yarn over, you might see yarn over needle or yarn around needle, but I'm not sure if that's the exact same thing she's talking about there. That one I'm not actually sure about.
All right, good question, Brenda. You're issuing some challenges here.
Yes.
I will take one final moment as a reminder. We have about 10 minutes left in today's live tutorial. So you can come back and rewatch this. I know Jen has mentioned, so if there's anything that you either missed or you want to come back to, you'll be able to find this tutorial live. And you can get the pattern for this tutorial and every other tutorial that we'll be doing this entire week with the link in the description. So we've got 5 patterns that we are going to be working our way through that are Valentine's Day themed, with the idea that you can gift these for Valentine's Day, but we always come up with some fun other ideas as well, especially in the chat box. I think we had our make 12 of these as a dozen cupcakes and hand them out. So feel free to use these projects for whatever you would like. And I will have some more specific reminders about what to expect for tomorrow at the end of the live. But this is the time to get in your final questions. I'm going to send it back over to Jen so she can wrap up this project and we can have our final calorie-free cupcakes. Monique specifically is enjoying that aspect of these.
Yes, that's great. That's true. Yeah, if that's important to you, you don't have to worry about it with this cupcake, calorie-free. So now you would just start following the frosting pattern as written. There are some decreases, obviously, because we need to close it up at the top here. The only decrease, we've already done the knit 2 together when we did the little picot edge, and you can see here I finished that round while we were talking, and you can see the nice little picots there that we have, nice little detail. And so you would just keep following the pattern. It's just knits and purls. You will have some knit 2 together decreases in this, which is no big deal because we already had been doing those. You're also going to have purl 2 together in this last little part. And so to purl 2 together, it's just like it sounds. We're going to take our right needle through the next 2 stitches on our left-hand needle and purl those together. And then you would just keep following the pattern as it's written. And then once you get to the last few rows, you're going, or rounds, I keep saying rows, but rounds because we're working in the round. You're going to want to take a little pause and weave in all your ends. And I'm not going to do that here since we're a little short on time. But I just want to mention it is that I know this is all going on the inside of our cupcake and you might not want to weave in your ends, but just keep in mind that if you don't, your stitch, the stitch that where you started with these new colors could end up getting loose over time because you didn't weave it in. So a lot of times what I'll do on the inside of my project is I will just weave it in. This is not like when I'm doing a shawl or a sweater. I'll just weave it in, go just like a little bit, just like maybe even 3 or 4 stitches. And a lot of times, it depends on the color yarn. Like this one, I wouldn't even then cut the ends. I would just leave them in there, contribute to the stuffing. But yes, make sure, I'm not going to do it now, but make sure you're weaving in those ends. And then you would take your polyfill stuffing, and I like to just kind of fluff it up like this and then stick it in. And you are going to want to slightly overfill it just because you are going to end up working some more rounds. And so let's just do one more round and I'll decrease and we'll finish this up. So again, you're just going to keep following the pattern. We're going to knit 1, knit 2 together. We'll pretend that this is our last round. So we'll knit 1. And knit 2 together. And I do have a little bit of the stuffing coming out because I did overfill, but that's okay because we can always just put a little bit more in there later if we need to. So, okay, we're going to just finish off this round and then I'll show you how to close it. And we're good to go. So once you've worked your final decrease round, and again, my little sample here is not going to look like a cupcake because I've skipped a lot of rounds on this. Although, you know, I did do 24 stitches on this little sample. So I feel like if you did work some more of the rounds following the pattern, I do think that you could just make a tiny little cupcake based off of just working up to 24 stitches. But keep in mind that that's something you're going to have to kind of play around with on your own because I'm making something here. I feel like that's not quite a cupcake, but you could play around with that. Okay, so we're going to once again trim our yarn. Here I recommend you leave a 12-inch tail. Again, don't measure. You just want something a little bit longer because we are going to be drawing through the stitches, putting the yarn through the stitches and drawing them tight like you would a hat. So with my tapestry needle here, I'm just going to slip all those stitches purlwise onto the tapestry needle and then bring the yarn through. So we're gonna just slip. I tend to do it a few at a time. So I'm really just doing like 1 needle at a time here. So I've slipped those 4 stitches and then bring it through. Some people like to go through twice. I only ever go through once. That's just, I don't know how I always did it, but I do know some people like to go through those stitches twice, but that again is a personal preference. So at this point, let's see, do we even really need a little more in there? Maybe. We'll just shove that last little bit that came out and then we'll just pull it tight to close. And again, keep in mind, this isn't, again, it's still kind of cute though. Look at it. It's kind of a mini cupcake. I feel like if I would have done a few more rounds up here, we would have had a mini, truly a mini cupcake. And so now at this point, I don't know that I have a needle the right size for sewing the button on, but what I would do is either if the hole on your, if you're adding the button, or you could add all kinds of things, but if you're adding a button, you're just obviously going to want to make sure that you have a needle that will go through the hole. This one is not even close. So if you do have a tapestry needle and it will go through the hole, you can use your yarn tail to sew your button on. Or you could also just use a needle and thread. I am very into cross stitch. So a lot of times I just use whatever cross stitch like needle I have around, an embroidery floss. Like I'll just take 1 or 2 strands of an embroidery floss because I always have that sitting around and use that to sew it on. But then for your tail, because you're like, well, how do I weave this in? And this is where we can finish off here, is that to get rid of this final end, you're going to want to go into your cupcake and back out and just be careful, because again, remember this little sample's little, but your cupcakes can be bigger. So just don't lose your tapestry needle inside the middle of your cupcake. And then you would just pull through like this. And then I put quite a bit of tension on this tail. And then I'm going to snip, but be careful not to snip your actual project, obviously. And then you can just kind of give it a wiggle, and it just will work itself right into the cupcake there. And then you won't even be able to see it. And then you can, shape this however you want, so, that it sits flat, and that's your cupcake. For this particular one final thing I'll say before we finish up here with Leah is that, the polyfill stuffing is not going to give you a totally flat bottom to your cupcake. And so if you do want it to, sit up like perfectly on a table, consider putting something, rigid in the bottom of your cupcake. I actually took a pool noodle, that, you can, I think even this time of year, you can find them at the dollar store, depending where you live. Maybe it's summer right now. But I just cut a pool noodle to about, so it's like the circle, and it has a circle in the middle. And then I just cut it so it was maybe about an inch thick. I have one pool noodle I use for all my craft projects, and I just shove that in the bottom, and then put a bunch of the polyfill stuffing in. But that allows my cupcake to stay nice and flat. So just a little tip if you're looking to add a little weight or stability. I did another project where I just took some glass, like those, I don't even know if they're glass, but like the little like glass stones or rocks like you would put in, like if you were making some sort of floral arrangement or terrarium. It's like kind of in that like fake flower section of the craft store. I've even put those in the bottom of projects like this, because it just adds a little bit of weight, and then it also will help it to sit flat on your table or wherever you're displaying your adorable little cupcake. And that's all there is to it. I think it's such a fun project, and really you can finish this if you are like a power knitter. You can really do this in one day, but for most of us, a couple nights watching our favorite TV show while knitting, you will have this one done.
Oh, well, that is so exciting. I love it. We're going to have some of those cupcakes, and hopefully some cupcakes to eat and snack on as well. We can make both kinds.
Yes, you can have both.
Exactly. And delicious. One of them will last longer than the other. The knitting
That's
one
right.
lasts forever.
That's right.
All right. That takes us to the end of our time. So Jen, you did a fantastic tutorial. Thank you so much for taking us through that. There are a lot of people that look very excited to try this pattern. Lots of hellos popping in from all over the place. So thank you to all of our viewers for joining us as well. A couple final thoughts from me before we say farewell for today. We want you to remember to join us again tomorrow for another live tutorial. Tomorrow we're streaming with our sewing expert. It is Emily Steffen, and we will be starting at 2:00 p.m. Central Time. Now, Emily is going to provide a live tutorial on how to make a Smoochy lip pillow. Very cute. And you can download the materials list and your free pattern right now using the link in the description before tomorrow's event. You can also take a quick look at the screen or find the entire mini series schedule in the video description so you know what to expect the rest of the week. So until tomorrow, thank you so much for joining us today. On behalf of Jen and our entire team, we will see you soon, and happy crafting.